Hi there, we're coming to you from the Buckley campsite on the Pend d'Oreille River. That last shot of the leaf flipping around in the wind there, that's a leaf hanging by a spider's web. We've seen that down there at the bottom of the Selma Creston. And I guess when I see that little leaf there, it reminds me that human life is hanging by a pretty thin thread, and sometimes the thread breaks and people are gone. So sometimes we have to take time and enjoy the people that we're around and also enjoy the atmosphere. So today we're trying to enjoy the atmosphere out here at the Pend d'Oreille Dam. So I just wanted to tell you that I'm from Trail B.C. and a lot of airheads come from Trail B.C. I don't understand why that is, but there was a story about a guy who owned a pig farm out there, and the traveling salesman came through and tried to sell him a vacuum cleaner. And while they were sitting there joking and talking, the salesman said to the farmer, he said, "What's that three-legged pig doing out in your pen there?" And the farmer said, "Well, funny you should ask me that." He said, "A couple of years ago," he said, our house burned down and this pig climbed up the stairs and saved my life." And the salesman said to him, "How'd he get the three legs?" Farmer says, "Funny you should ask." He said, "A couple of years ago," he said, "I was plowing out in the field and my tractor almost tipped over on me and killed me." He said, "And the pig came over and lifted the tractor off me, saved my life." And the farmer says, "How'd he get the salesman said, "How'd he get the three legs?" And the farmer said, "Well," he said, "I tell you what, you get a pig like that," he says, "you don't want to eat them all at once." There's also a story about a guy living out in the Aris area who was living out on a farm there, and a new highways manager came along and was checking all the roads, and all of a sudden the manager drove up to where the farmer was sitting on the fence, and he said to the farmer, he said, "This road looks pretty bad out here." He said, "Do you think I could drive through that mud hole?" And the farmer said, "I don't see why not." So the manager jumped in his car and proceeded to drive through the mud hole, and the car sank, and he just got out in time to see the taillights go out of sight. So he got out and said to the farmer, he said, "I thought you said that it would only that I could drive through that pothole." And the farmer says, "Well, I can't understand that. It's only halfway up my ducks." You're probably saying, "Who is this guy sitting out there trying to make the trees laugh?" And my name is Frida. Frida, free to you and $20 to everybody else. So let's go. I was born out on a farm in the area just out of Dawson Creek, and when my dad, just before I was born, my dad wanted a boy and my mom wanted a Cocker Spaniel, and when I came along they were both happy. Ask me if I've got a good memory, and I'll tell you I do, because I remember one time when I went to the dance with my dad and came home with my mom, and I was just a little squirt back then. I'll get that right one of these days. I told my friends before I went to school that as a kid my parents dropped me a lot, and they said, "Well, it's kind of normal for nervous parents to drop their babies." And I said, "From a second-story window?" We lived in a little place not too far from Swan Lake. I don't know why they call it Swan Lake. I've never seen any swans there. I should have called it Ruptured Duck Lake. I remember the time my uncle told me he was going to take me out and teach me how to swim. Took me out in the middle of the Swan Lake there in a small boat and threw me overboard. Learning how to swim wasn't bad, but getting that double knot untied on that plastic bag was a tough one. We're going to get that right yet. Remember my first day of school, the teacher said to me, I came in at 9:30, and she said, "You should have been here at 9 o'clock. And I says, "Why? What happened?" Our teacher was about 60 years old, and she was ugly as sin. She went down to Vancouver one time to go to see the ocean, and she went down, and she was so ugly that the tide wouldn't come in. We were so poor when we lived on the farm. That was in the 1940s. We never had any sleighs or toboggans or anything like that. I used to have to slide down the hill on my cousin. 36, 24, 28. That's only one leg. One time the teacher was asking us if we knew who signed the Magna Carta, and I said, I'm damned if I know. So she phoned my dad, and he came to school, and he said, he said, if you sign the damn thing, you tell her. The teacher asked us why the Indians were the first people in Canada, and we told her it's probably because they had reservations. The school kids asked me if I wanted to play ball, and I said sure. They asked me if I wanted to play third base, and I said yes, and I didn't realize they wanted me to be third base. I couldn't get past grade 3 because my dad was in grade 4, and they didn't want to put me in with him and make him feel bad. One thing we learned about working on the farm is you never walk behind the cow after she's been eating grass and she's coughing. Remember one time I worked for this farmer. I worked for him for about 6 months, and when the haying season was over, he gave me a duck as a gift. He gave me my wages on this duck, and I had to catch the bus to go home, and I didn't know what to do for a couple hours, so I went to a show and took the duck inside my coat into the theater, and sitting there, and the darn duck is flopping around and making a fuss, and so I opened the zipper on my pants and let him stick his neck out, and I hear the lady on the right hand side say, the guy over here has got his zipper out and this dewey's sticking out, and the other lady said, well, just ignore him. She said, I can't, it's eating my popcorn. We had a guy living next door to us on the farm. His name was Marcel Ledbetter. He was the ugliest boy I ever seen. He finally made his way down to Mexico and made a fortune teasing the bulls at the bullfights. I remember my first horse my uncle got for me. He was blind, 1 ear, 3 legs, and his name was Lucky. Remember my first girlfriend. She had this beautiful long blonde hair growing out of her nose. After I got to know this girl, I thought maybe we went out for a few months together. I thought maybe this was a time when condoms and birth control started becoming popular, and I thought, well, maybe I should get some condoms just in case. You never know, eh? So I went in the drugstore, and the druggist said, well, we only sell them in a gross, which is 144. He said, maybe you'll get lucky. So I thought, okay, I'll take 12. So that one night, the girl said, would you like to come over and meet my folks and have supper? So I said, yeah. So we go over, and guess what? Her dad is the guy that runs the bloody pharmacy. So my girlfriend said, would you like to go to church tomorrow? And I said, you bet. So after we went to church, we came back, and she says, I didn't know you were religious. And I said, I didn't know your dad ran the pharmacy. My dad came from a small place in Saskatchewan called Deer Chin. It's just below Moose Jaw. And went there one time to visit, and went to church. And I got to the church, and I was the only guy there. So the preacher came out, and he talked and talked and talked. And finally, when he finished, he came down and shook my hand, and he said, thank you very much for coming to church. He said, what did you think of the sermon? I said, well, you know, he said, back home, my job on the farm was feeding the cows, and if only one cow shows up, I don't feed her the whole load. Over the years, we learned to get along and meet old people, and there's a story about this 85-year-old dad who has a 50-year-old son, and he went to his dad one day and said, Dad, he said, Mom's been dead for a few years, and you're going to be going into an old folks home, and I want to know what your final plan is. And the old boy said, what do you mean? He said, well, I want to know, do you want to be cremated, or do you want to have a big funeral, or what? And the old boy looks at him and says, why don't you surprise me? This old couple had been married about 60 years, and they went down to the park there, Lakeside Park in Nelson, B.C. And they were standing there by the wishing well, and she fell, and he said, Great, I didn't even realize these damn things work. Got to meet an old guy sitting down on the park bench there by Lakeside Park there the other day. He was sitting there crying, and I stopped and said to him, what's happening there? I can see you're a senior in distress. And he said, well, he said, you know, my wife of 60 years has just passed away, he said. And I said, well, I'm sorry about that. It must be a hell of a shock losing your wife of 60 years. And he said, it is. But He says, I got married. I married an 18-year-old girl, and she's a hell of a wife. He said she wants to have sex 3 times a day, and she cooks really well and has her own car. So I said to him, well, why are you crying? And he said, well, I can't remember where I live. This Jewish couple that we got to meet on our travels through our lifespan so far, been married about 58 years. And she said to Monday, she said, Abby, she says, my sex life is not that good anymore. Could you maybe talk to the rabbi? So the old boy says, let's go see the rabbi. So the rabbi says, okay, he says, what you do is you hire some young guy to stand beside your bed when you're making love and get a big bath towel and have him wave it over top of you while you're having sex. They tried it, didn't work. So they went back to see the rabbi, and the rabbi says, here's what you do. He says, you switch places now. He said, you trade places with the young man with the towel. He says, you let the young man go in bed with your wife and you swing the towel. So they tried it, and halfway through, his wife was screaming. She was enjoying everything, and so the old boy says, stop right there. He says, you schmuck. He said, this is the way you wave the towel. This old musician goes to see the doctor, and he says, Doc, he said, I got a hell of a sore throat. He said, I just can hardly talk. And the doc says, well, it's fine. He said, what do you do? And he said, I'm a musician. Oh, he said, that's common for people who play music to get a sore throat from blowing into their instruments. And he says, what do you play? And the guy says, I play a fiddle. This couple stopped at the Fruitvale gas station and to get some gas, and while they were there, we're talking to the attendant. The guy says to the attendant, he says, can you tell me why they call this place Fruitvale? The guy says, just a minute, I'll ask my wife. Hey, Bruce! This couple lived out on a farm, and they had a huge family of 16 kids, and the mother couldn't think of enough names to call her husband. This is a story about an old folks home, and this old guy named Barney was living in the room in the old folks home, and one day you hear a little rustle out in front of his room, and he goes out, and here's Susie standing out there. She's got her kimono on, and she flashes her kimono open. She said, would you like some soup or sex? He says, I'll have the soup. This 50-year-old son visited his dad that lives in the old folks home, and he hadn't seen his dad since he moved in the old folks home, so he says, maybe I should go and see the old boy. So he goes in and he walks up to the front counter, and he says, have you got my father in here? His name is Mr. Smith. She said, if you look down the hallway, she'll see the nurse is just bringing him up now. He's in the wheelchair. So he looked down the hallway, and sure enough, here comes the nurse with his dad. And as he gets down the hallway a little farther, his dad kind of falls over to the right, and the nurse kind of sets him back up again, and then he falls to the left, and she sets him back up again. And as the father gets close to the dad, the boy says, Dad, it's sure nice to see you. He says, how do you like this old folks home? And the old boy says, I hate the place. I hate it with a passion, and I hate this nurse. And he says, why is that, Dad? He says, because she won't let me fart. One thing I hear about getting Alzheimer's is a very positive thing for seniors. Just imagine, you can hide your own Easter eggs. All your old friends are new friends. And every time you have sex, it's like doing it the first time. This new RCMP traveling through the small town on the cusp. Stops there, he's checking all the places out. He drives by this old folks home, and he sees 2 old ladies sitting out on some lawn chairs outside the home, and they're naked. And he thought, I wonder what's going on here. So he goes in and talks to the manager. He says, I see 2 old girls naked as jaybirds sitting out there on lawn chairs. He said, what's happening? And the old boy says, just ignore them. He said, they're retired hookers. He said, they're having a yard sale. This 50-year-old guy with Alzheimer's marries this 20-year-old girl, and on their wedding night, he has sex 3 times. And she says, how many times are you going to actually do it? He says, have I been here already? couple go into a restaurant, and he tells the waiter, look, he said, can you bring us a ham and cheese sandwich? He said, and bring 2 plates. He said, and give us 1 cup of coffee and 2 cups. And he says, that's kind of a strange order. Why is that? Well, he said, it's our 50th wedding anniversary, and we share everything. So the waiter brings the sandwich, and he waits a few minutes, and the lady's half eaten her sandwich, but the guy hasn't finished yet, or hasn't even started. So he goes over to him and he says, what's the matter? Is your sandwich no good? And the old boy says, no. He said, I told you that we share everything, and it's her turn to use the teeth first. This old maid living in the old folks' home talked him into taking her 3 puppies in the old folks' home. They put her down on the end, and she kept them there in the room with her. And we went to see her one time, and they were the cutest things you ever seen. And so he said to her, what do you call these dogs? She says, well, I call them Ruffy, Tuffy, and Liberace. Why do you call him that? She said, well, I call Ruffy because he's the roughest. I call Tuffy the toughest. I call Tuffy because he's the toughest, and I call Liberace because he's the pianist. This guy goes in to see his surgeon. He says, Doc, he says, I got to have a new hip. He's having a hell of a time walking. Every time I go to walk, I keep falling down on the left side. And so the surgeon said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. He said, we bring you in, put a brand new hip in. He said, you'll be like $1 million. He said, you won't even know you had a faulty hip. The old boy says, well, he said, will I be able to play the piano after you do the surgery? And the doc says, yeah. The old guy says, well, that's funny because I can't play now. This old fella goes to see the doctor, and he's 89 years old, and he said, Doc, he said, could you check me over? He said, I'd like to know if I can live to be 100. And the old boy says, the doc says, well, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I can give you a checkup, but I can't guarantee you're going to be 100. What do you want to be 100 for? And the guy says, in the old folks' home where I'm at, he said, if anybody who gets to be 100, they get a nice badge on their shirt, Centurion badge, and you get a T-shirt. He says, and I really want to be a Centurion. So the doc checks him over, and he said to the guy, he said, man, he said, for a guy 89, you're in good shape. He said, tell me, I got one question. He said, you still have a bowel movement every morning? And the guy says, right on, 5 o'clock every morning, I have a bowel movement. The doc says, that's good. And the guy says, not really, because I don't get up till 9. One year, this guy's wife wakes up in the morning, he's laying there sleeping, and he wakes up and he sees she's staring at him, and he says, what are you looking at? She says, I've been married to you for 30 years, and I just wondered if I died, would you get married again? He said, I probably would. He said, we had a pretty good time, he said, and I enjoyed being married, and I probably would. She said, would you let her wear my clothes? He said, I probably would. I spent a lot of money on those things, and I probably would. She said, would you let her wear my jewelry? He said, well, I spent a lot of money on those things. I thought you would. She said, would you let her use my golf clubs? He says, no, she's left-handed. The senior phones up the veterinary. He says, veterinary, he says, I got a problem with my cat. He says, my cat's not feeling that good. And the vet says, well, give it a pint of castor oil. And the guy thought, that's pretty severe, but I'll do it. So anyway, about a week later, the doctor met him on the street, and he said to him, he says, hey, he said, well, you're the guy that phoned me with a sick cat. And the guy says, yeah. He says, how's he doing now? He says, I don't know. He said, the last time I seen him, he was going over the hill with 6 other cats. 2 of them were digging, 2 were covering up, and 2 of them were looking for new places to dig. This alternate lifestyle guy was walking down the street with this Chihuahua on a string walking him along gaily along the street, and stops in front of a bar, and there was a Great Dane dog tied up at the fire hydrant there, so there was a little bit of confrontation between the 2 dogs. Didn't last long. So this alternate lifestyle guy goes in the bar and says, who owns that Great Dane tied out here to the fire hydrant, or to the meter? And this big guy says, I own him, what's about? He said, well, he said, my Chihuahua just killed him. And the guy says, no bloody way. He said, that Great Dane would take any dog in a stride. He says, how did he kill him? And the guy says, he got stuck in his throat. We're talking about obesity and old age. A lot of people are having trouble keeping their weight down. There's diet plans galore. There's videotapes on the market for money. There's a new one out now I'm offering to you. It's no strings attached, free tape. Send it to you in the mail, no charge. It's a piece of duct tape about this long. You put it right across your cake hole. Guaranteed to lose weight. We got a slow neighbor that kind of lives out our way, especially on the farm where I was born. His elevator doesn't quite go all the way to the top, and his wheelbarrow tire is a little short of air. Went out to apply for a job the other day, and walks into to a place, and on the application, the job application, where it says sex, he said, "Yes, please, as soon as possible, if not sooner." Two Catholic sisters were driving across the country going to a born-again convention, and they ran out of gas about 5 miles out of town, and they walked in and asked the guy if they could get some gas or they could drive him back to the car. He says, "No, my service truck is out, but," he said, I can't give you a jerry can, but he said, "I'll give you a potty. I got a child's potty here that'll hold about a half a gallon. If I fill it half full and you walk slow, you can get it back and pour it into the car and then drive the car in." So they paid him, and they took this porta potty out with the child's potty out with the gas in it, and they're standing there pouring in the tank on the car, and this guy drove by and says, rolls his window and says, "Man, that's got to be faith." This blonde took her car into the mechanic to have a tune-up. She came back in about 30 minutes and it was all fixed. She said, "What's wrong?" He says, "Crap in the carburetor." She says, "How often I got to do that?" This other young blonde came into her house one day and told her husband, she said, "You got to do something with that car." She said, "It's not running very good. It's got water in the carburetor." He says, "How do you know it's got water in the carburetor? I'm the mechanic and stuff." But she said, "It's got water in the carburetor because I just drove it in the swimming pool." The RCMP stopping a senior outside of Nelson the other day, stopped him for speeding, and he said to the guy, "How old are you?" And the guy says, "I'm 89. And he said, "What in the hell are you doing speeding at your age?" And the guy said, "Well, I wasn't speeding." They got into a little bit of an argument, and finally the cop was writing the ticket, and while he's writing the tickets, his flies are bothering him, and he's slapping away, and the farmer says to him, "You know what kind of flies those are?" And the cop says, "No, I don't." He says, "Those are circle flies." And the cop says, "What do you mean, circle flies?" He said, "Yeah, we get them flying around behind the horses at home." The cop says, "Are you calling me a horse's ass?" And the old farmer says, "No, I'm not, but you certainly can't fool those flies." Story about a car show that was being held in a small town outside of Nelson, probably at Weimar. And this guy was taking his Model T Ford to the car show, and about halfway there, the damn thing quits on him, and guy pulls up in a late model Cadillac and says to the guy, "Can I help you out?" And the guy says, "Yeah." He said, "I'd like to get my car to the car show." And so the guy said, "Well, I got a tow rope in the back." So they threw a tow rope on it, and they took off down the road. And after about 5 miles, the guy in the Cadillac forgot he had this Model T behind, and he's running about 80 miles an hour, pretty soon 100. And a cop was waiting on the roadside, and he checks him. He go by, and he couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't catch him. He tried and tried, and finally he called ahead on the radio. He said, "Be on guard." He said, "There's a white Cadillac doing about 105 miles an hour coming down your way." And he said, "There's also a Model T behind him blowing his horn. He wants by." Guy on the street corner standing there looking like he's just enjoying the scenery, and a fellow walks up and says, "Hey buddy, you give me the time?" And the guy didn't answer him, and he said, "Hey buddy, can you give me the time?" And the guy didn't answer. So finally they both walked away, and this one fellow walks over and says to the guy, he says, "Hey," he said, "that guy came up and asked you the time." He said, "Why didn't you tell him?" He said, "You didn't want to punch in the nose?" This blonde phones up the BCAA. She's got one of these BCAA travel plans, and she said, "Hey, I need you to come over and unlock my car. I've locked myself out of the car." She says, "Hurry up, too. It's a convertible. The top's down. It looks like rain." We got a young couple that moved down the street from us. They've been married about 15 minutes and moved in there. We haven't seen them for a while, but we found out they don't know the difference between Vaseline and putty. How do we know that? All their windows fell out. Remember, laughter is free. It's good for us. It's all around us. And one of the quotes that I can remember hearing over the years is where you're driving around, or somebody stops and says to you, "How long have you been here?" "Quite a while." "You lived here all your life?" And you turn around and say, "Not yet." I got one old elephant story I want to leave you here with. A story about this fellow who was working as a circus clown, and he had a couple of Indian elephants, and he used to take them around with the Barnum and Bailey circus. So he stopped in this one town, and a fella came over to him, kind of an East Indian guy, long jacket on, could be an Arab, and he says to the guy, he says, "Is that an East Indian elephant you got here, an African elephant?" East Indian, no, the guy's an Indian elephant. He said, "I bet you $100 he said, I can make that elephant go down to his knees." And the guy says, "No bloody way." He said, "I've worked with this elephant for 50 years. He said, "He won't command anybody but me." So the guy said, "Well, let me try. Give me the $100. So $100, and he borrowed a small stool. He got it behind the elephant, and he gave it a real swift kick right in the testicles, and the elephant fell down on his knees. So anyway, guy took the $100, and then it was about a week later, the same guy walks up to the elephant trainer. The guy didn't recognize him, and he says to him, he says, "Is that an East Indian elephant, or an Indian elephant, or what is it?" And the guy says, "It's an Indian elephant." He says, "I bet you I can make that elephant shake his head." And the trainer took a look at him. He said, "Yeah, I thought there's something about this guy I remember. I'm not quite sure." But anyway, "I'll bet you $100 you can't." So the guy says, "Well, put your money here." So he put the money there and got a little stool. He walked up to the elephant and he lifted the elephant's ear, and he says to the elephant, he said, "Would you like another kick in the testicles?" And have a good one.